Check, check.
Welcome to our second plenary. Please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
This political moment. That's what we're talking about today. I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! And it is an honor to be with you today. And as I look out in the front row this morning, we broadcast Democracy Now! From just outside the convention center. And our primary guest was one of last night's plenary speakers, the civil rights legend, the human rights leader, and a person who has been so important in linking the movements across time, breaking down barriers, Dr. Angela Davis. So last night we heard Professor Davis. We also heard Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American Congress member representing a major African American center in the United States, Detroit. It's this intersectionality that will save us. Ultimately, whether we're talking about the climate catastrophe, immigrant rights, labor rights, hundreds of thousands of people marching across the United States on May Day, in Canada, in Europe, around the planet, taking on authoritarianism, taking on not only the growing wave and the pressure in this country at this point, but people around the world have known what it means to watch their countries change and also fight back. Whether we're talking about Duterte in the Philippines, or we're talking about Orban in Hungary, whether we're talking about Latin America, whether we're talking about the United States of America, this political moment. It's not exactly described in this way usually, but think about this week, the first 100 days of President Trump's second term. His polls are cratering. The economy has contracted. The issues that he says he was elected on, for example, immigration and the economy, he is tanking on. Not only tanking for him, but these are the worst poll numbers for any modern president in 80 years. He is uniting people across the political spectrum against him. And this is a moment that we're going to talk today about what people can do with leading not just thinkers, but activists, people who've been on the front lines, who know the pain, but also the joy of working with others. The joy of community. It's a little hard to talk about joy when we talk about this latest 2 months of a total blockade on Gaza, the level of hunger, let alone the killings. Also, tomorrow is World Press Freedom Day. Over 200 journalists have been killed in Gaza. In the last year and a half, we have seen nothing like this in history. I'm going to start at this end to talk about the people we have who are going to reflect on this, but not only reflect, talk about strategizing and what their plans are. Noura Erakat is there. Noura Erakat is there, as she seems to be everywhere. A human rights attorney, associate professor of Africana Studies and the program of criminal justice at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, recently completed a non-resident fellowship of the Religious Literacy Project at the Harvard Divinity School. Noura is the author of Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine. She received the Palestine Book Award. She received the Bronze Medal for the Independent Publishers Book Award. She's co-founder and editor of Jadaliyah, editorial board member of the Journal of Palestine Studies, as well as Human Geography. She is a board member, also a co-founding board member of the DC Palestinian Film and Arts Festival. Her writings have appeared in so many prominent newspapers. She's been on TV repeatedly, and of course, most importantly, on Democracy Now!
That's not the shortened one. We're good.
And next to her is Ahmad, who it is amazing to meet people in person. I was going to say breathing the same air, but I know we're supposed to be wearing masks, and there's mine. But Dr. Ahmad is incredibly brave. I mean, he is a board-certified emergency medicine physician, works at Advocate Christ Medical Center in Chicago, currently serving as attending physician at Assistant Program Director for Emergency Medicine Residency Program and Global Health Director for the Emergency Department at Advocate Christ, a board member of the Palestinian American Medical Association, past board member of Med Global, assistant clinical professor at University of Chicago, University of Illinois, at Chicago, and adjunct professor at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. Last year we talked to Dr. Ahmad when he came back from his, I guess you could call it, tour of duty in Gaza, working at Nasser Hospital and Al-Aqsa Hospital, worked recently in Lebanon. Dr. Ahmad spent time in Syria, Turkey, Kenya, Greece, Jordan, and we'll find out, I hope, when he speaks to us about why, though a number of physicians have gone back to Gaza, he hasn't, not for lack of trying. And what does that mean as a Palestinian American physician not to be allowed back in Gaza? I also want to welcome Eran Efrati, who is an investigative researcher into the Israeli military and arms industry, worked with International Criminal Court, participated in both independent and UN investigations into Israeli military operations, served in the Israeli military for a number of years, but now investigating the organization he worked for. His investigative reports have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian. He currently serves as the director of campaigns and partnership for Jewish Voice for Peace. His research focusing on military and police partnerships between the United States and Israel. We interviewed him more than a decade ago when he was exposing what fellow Israeli soldiers were doing. And his work has only become more important. Next to him is Naomi Klein. Naomi is an award-winning journalist, columnist, international best-selling author of 9 books in 35 languages. Did you translate them all into all of those languages? Author of No Logo, The Shock Doctrine, This Changes Everything, No Is Not Enough, On Fire, Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World, which won the inaugural Women's Prize for Nonfiction last year. She's a columnist for The Guardian newspaper. Her writing has appeared in leading publications. She's honorary professor of media and climate at Rutgers and associate professor in geography at the University of British Columbia, where she is founding co-director of UBC's Center for Climate Justice. I hope everyone has read the piece she most recently co-authored for The Guardian, The Rise of End Times Fascism. But she'll talk about that in a moment. Now we're going to begin with the great Professor Robin D.G. Kelley. He is a distinguished professor, Gary B. Nash Endowed Chair in U.S. History at UCLA, author of several books, currently completing Making a Killing, Cops, Capitalism, and the War on Black Life. And I also hope that you've gotten a chance to read his piece on the fires in California, on rebuilding Altadena, where he is from, called Between Fires in Los Angeles and Fascism in America. And we're going to begin with Professor Kelley. I'm not used to being actually physically next to him, so...
That's true.
So for many years, you've taught us about racial capitalism in the United States, how it's been sustained for decades despite the immense suffering it causes, but also how radical movements in the US fight back, how they build anti-racist, anti-colonial, internationalist workers' movements for liberation. If you can talk about how these groups are coming together now and what they're up against.
Right. Well, first of all, it's such an honor to be here. And I can't see everyone, but it's a lot of people here. And to be with this amazing panel and to be with Amy in person. So first and foremost, let's just acknowledge that while our path to this moment has a much longer historical route, what we're dealing with is unprecedented, as far as I'm concerned, in modern times. Secondly, in terms of the question, the only way to build workers' power is through solidarity-based, and that is to say, internationalist politics. It means resisting gendered racial capitalism. It means resisting patriarchy and ableism, homo and transphobia, colonialism, which, of course, genocide is itself rooted in colonialism. So this should be the baseline. Third, I think we need to continually make the point that radical, multiracial internationalist movements in the US are not impossible. There's all these generations come up and say, well, it can't happen. But this is actually, it's not only possible, but it's our heritage, right? This is our legacy, our history. We have a vibrant left history in the US, communist, socialist, anarchist, anti-fascist movements, revolutionary democratic movements going from Reconstruction to the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And I'm also thinking, just a plug for, Benjamin Balthazar has this new book called Citizens of the Whole World, which is brilliant. He argues that anti-Zionism is foundational to the history of the Jewish left. I was supposed to blurb it, but they didn't give me enough time, so that's my blurb right there. But it's an amazing book, I have to say. And of course, when we think about examples, we can't limit ourselves to the US. Now, it's hard to believe that we have this history because so many of us are told, one, that our legacy of one of intractable oppression and subjugation. Two, that the obstacle to the kind of internationalist class solidarity is identity politics, whether it's Black, brown, indigenous, feminist, queer, being unable to transcend their identities, or whether it's white people so trapped by whiteness that they persistently fight against their own class interests. And while there's some truth to these claims, the oppression that we face is almost always a response to the strength of our movements. That's where the oppression comes from. Radical movements led by people of color have always been at the forefront of building international class solidarity. And at the same time, not all movements resisting racism, patriarchy, homophobia, et cetera, embrace the kind of class solidarity that we're talking about today. And finally, one last thing about this, the people who call themselves white are not hopelessly racist. Trust me, they're not. Racism is not DNA. It's not the same thing. Racism is ideological. It is taught. It is built upon a fragile foundation, which is why it always has to be shored up. And that's why the attacks on so-called DEIA, it's really about criminalizing anti-racism and anti-sexism. And proof of it is that, they're not trying to convince us, right? They are appealing to white people instead And if you just consider the fact that any time anyone in the administration mentions DEI, it is preceded by this list of adjectives, right? Subversive, radical, race-based, anti-American, Marxist. Like, they don't want us to think about what diversity or equity or equality might actually mean, but they shroud these terms in order to make patriarchal white supremacy common sense. That's what they're seeking to do. So there's too many lessons, that we have learned from our movements, negative lessons, positive lessons, but I just want to close by just saying a few things. These are the lessons that I feel like we should take from these historical examples. One, don't underestimate the enemy. The ruling regime, they're not stupid. They have a very clear agenda, and it does not require popularity. It doesn't require winning over the courts and so forth. And let's remember, there are elements of their agenda backed by a segment of the Democratic Party, right? Let's not forget a large segment. Eroding workers' bargaining rights, ensuring health care remains in the marketplace, eliminating the social safety net, corporate deregulation, military expansion, support for Israel and its ongoing genocide, right? That's bipartisan. We need to distinguish, the second lesson, we need to distinguish between mobilizing and organizing. We can get large crowds out, chant, hold signs, block traffic, but then people go home and what comes out of it? And I think, about organizing the organizing folks discussed this morning, which I missed much of it because I was on a plane. But what I do know is that if you go back to the 1980s and the sanctuary movement in those days, for those of you old enough to remember, wasn't about a municipal status. It was an underground network to protect people, many political refugees from the INS. And so we need to think about protecting people from kidnapping. One other is that some of our most radical movements in the US emerged in opposition to so-called liberal regimes. So when we look back nostalgically at Roosevelt's New Deal or Johnson's Great Society, we've got to remember those anti-fascist movements emerged under Roosevelt. Anti-fascist movements like the Black Panther Party and others emerged under the Johnson's Great Society, Clinton neoliberalism, Obama's imperialist wars, era marked by the emergence of Black Lives Matter. So the lesson here is that defeating the fascism that we now face requires something deeper than defeating the current administration or winning elections, but a much deeper ideological shift. So like, for example, when we always return back to repeating Martin Niemöller's words, first it came for the socialists, and so forth, we have to find a way to live the implications of his warning. That is to say, one, we need to always stand in solidarity and fight for others as if our lives depended on it. It's not just allies. And secondly, socialists, you've got to remember that word. It's a good word. The socialists were not only mentioned because they were first, but socialist is not a protected category, by the way. It's not a racial and ethnic group. It's not even a class per se. It is a movement, a dangerous idea, or what Ariella Azoulay would say, a potential history. What we stand for should be more than just self-defense. We should be fighting for the world we're trying to build. And the last lesson here is that when we seek to build solidarity, we have to have ironclad principles that we do not betray. And we've got to stand up and fight for those principles. The liberation of Palestine is not negotiable. It is not negotiable, and it never will be. Thank you.
So, Naomi Klein, you've been writing about the right for a long time. This year, you've been writing about Palestine in relation to the global rise of what you've called end times fascism. Can you talk about Gaza as a paradigm for making sense of the supremacy that you have taken on, calling yourself an anti-Zionist, what exactly that means, and also how the Jewish community and the establishment have changed in their response to what that means?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say I'm so happy and feel so at home in this room. A little more than a year ago, I was at a Seder in the streets organized by JVP, and if not now, outside Chuck Schumer's place in Brooklyn, calling for an arms embargo. And it was the second night of Passover, and I was one of the speakers, and a journalist asked me right before I went on stage if it wasn't hard to not be with my family on such an important night. And what I said then, and what I want to say to all of you, because it's not every day that we get 2,000 JVP organizers in the same room, is that I am with my family. And I can't pass up an opportunity to thank each and every one of you for the model, for the light that you have represented for so many around the world in these darkest of times. I want to thank the JVP leadership. I see Stephanie Fox in beautiful colors in the front row there. We are lucky to be led by a collective of extraordinary, heart-filled, principled, not fearless, because we have fear, but defiant organizers. And this gathering represents true defiance in the face of the repression that we just heard about from Robin. And we need that spirit. And that's also something that we learn from movements who have faced US-backed state repression around the world and in this hemisphere. Noura has written so powerfully about how we are in a boomerang moment, as Aimé Césaire has written about, and I know you're going to be talking about that. The boomerang is also from Latin America, right? And one of the things that I have learned from movements in Latin America that suffered under military dictatorships, disappearances, and all of these extraordinary tactics that are coming home in this moment, is that being public, organizing in the open, can sometimes be the safest thing you can do at a moment when the state is trying to drive you underground. So that's also what I see in this room. There was a lot in your question, as usual, Amy. We would be so lost without Amy Goodman, would we not? Another lifeline. So you asked me about end times fascism and what we mean by that, and also what Gaza or the Israeli project, I would say, represents, right? I think it's less the idea of Gaza as a paradigm or Palestinians as a paradigm than the Israeli state as a model that stands for a particular kind of safety in a sea of suffering. Safety for the few. I found myself thinking about the only time I've been to Gaza was in 2009, after the first of the post-siege, full-blown military onslaughts right after Cast Lead. I managed to get in somehow under the radar with press credentials. But when I was in Gaza, I spoke to the press, and my presence there was public. I talked about why I was supporting BDS. So when I came back through the Erez checkpoint, they were ready for me. And there was the head security guard there was named Erez. So I wrote about him in Doppelganger, Erez from Erez. He didn't want to interrogate me, he wanted to interrogate my husband, Avi. He asked Avi to get his woman under control. Avi got taken upstairs at the Erez checkpoint. I didn't really understand what the Erez checkpoint was until I went there, because I pictured the kinds of checkpoints I'd seen in the West Bank. I didn't realize it was this almost like this airport terminal to nowhere, right? That there's just like this big infrastructure now, and then on the other side is the wall. So it's that architecture has really stayed in my mind. So Erez takes Avi upstairs to the second floor, and he meets a general. And the general tells Avi to look out the window, and there's a bunch of tanks that are doing some kind of military exercise. And he says, "You see those tanks? We were about to send them in to rescue you." And it went on from there, explaining why I was stupid, idiots. Nonetheless, they were going, do you know what Hamas was going to do to you? So, we had been in no danger. We had been welcomed with great hospitality. We had met with many different organizations. The threat was here, but they were trying to teach us this lesson. They were saying, whoever you think you are, to us, you are only this thing called a Jew. And we were about to do a ground invasion of Gaza to rescue you, even though you weren't in any danger. Now, that was a lie. They were not going to do that. But they were trying to teach us something. And what they were trying to teach us was about this particular kind of safety that they were offering. The safety of the fortress, the safety of the bunker, the safety of the Iron Dome, the safety of the safe room, the safety of the armed drone, the safety of the endless violence, and this offer of belonging, an armed belonging in the in-group. And so I think if we look at the solidarity that has been offered to Israel by the US government, bipartisan, by the Canadian government, by the EU, except Ireland, and Spain, that it is not just about supporting the state. It's about supporting a vision of a bubble of safety for the privileged few inside a sea of suffering. And this is why we put that modifier on fascism, Astra Taylor and I, in that piece, because I think we are seeing something different, because history isn't just a loop that plays over and over again. It accumulates, right? As Walter Benjamin told us, wreckage upon wreckage. But the wreckage has a kind of a weather system. The wreckage has its own energy. It changes, right? And the fascism of the 1930s and 40s had a horizon. After the apocalyptic violence, there was an offer to that in-group. And that was true, I think, of early Zionism as well, a sort of a pastoral future. But we're now in another age, which military analysts not far from here in DC call the age of consequences, right? The age of consequences of not acting in the face of climate change, the age of consequences of allowing income inequality to spiral beyond anyone's imaginings, we are in the age of consequences of structural adjustment, so-called structural adjustment, which is really policies of forced economic immiseration forced upon the world by the IMF and the World Bank not far from here. All of this is intersecting, right? All of these failures, we're in the rubble of all of that, right? So there is no longer a horizon beyond the bunker. The end is taken for granted by the most powerful people on the planet. And so what we were writing about is trying to understand what are some through lines that connect this strange kind of Frankenstein-like coalition that is Trump, the sort of MAGA base who are taking all of this sadistic joy and pleasure in seeing prisoners paraded through through Salvadoran gulags, being shaved, being shackled, and cheering. How does that connect Elon Musk's and Jeff Bezos's fantasies about escaping the planet into outer space? How does it connect with Peter Thiel's bunker in New Zealand and Mark Zuckerberg's bunker in Hawaii? And how does it connect with the Christian Zionists like Pete Hegseth, who see in Israel the actual end times, right? That they see in this genocide the preconditions for the Messiah returning and the rapture happening, right? And, I've been studying disaster capitalism for a long time. And the way in which the responses to disasters are increasingly being privatized, and the rich are getting their own firefighters, as Robin wrote about in that extraordinary piece, but this has been happening for a while. You have prisoners fighting the fires for $1 a day, and you've got it's called concierge service, where they'll save your house or your vineyard. There was even a short-lived airline, I wrote about this 15 years ago, called HelpJet, offered to people in the hurricane zone in Florida, where they would tell you if a hurricane was headed to your house, and they would send a limousine to take you to the airport, and the tagline was, "Turn your hurricane into a luxury vacation." And I realized this is the rapture, This is a secular rapture. The chosen are being lifted up into their golden city. It might not be in the sky, it might be in Dubai, okay? So this is what we need to understand is that they've given up on this world. That's the most important lesson that I think we need to understand, because it needs to inform how we organize. And I actually believe it gives us a possibility for building the broadest multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational movement that we possibly could. Because what is more uniting than we're the people who are going to stay, and these are the people who, whether it is in their religious fantasies or their billionaire fantasies, their tech fantasies, they are all leaving. Some of these people who want their private cities, they call themselves tech Zionists. They actually use that term because Israel has come to stand for this. So I think I'm out of time. Am I out of time?
Not quite.
Okay. So there's so much I want to say about this. Okay. So at a certain point after Oslo, before Oslo, there used to be a lot of talk in the Oslo so-called peace process, this idea that you had to have peace in order to have security, right? That was the peace incentive. But after the collapse of Oslo, this coincided quite precisely with the rise of what used to be called the dot-com bubble. In Israel, it was called Startup Nation, right? And another kind of economy was imagined, an economy that was built on tech. And in particular, post 9/11, security tech. Because everybody wanted their iron domes. And everybody wanted, and now Trump is talking about his golden dome. Of course, it has to be golden. But Israel started to offer its expertise to the world. And so I think that in understanding what Israel represents, it represents a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And it isn't just the classic kinds of Zionist solidarity that we might think we understand. It's also the Christian Zionist support, but it's also this strange sort of tech identification around this bubble exodus nation. And there's this affinity between what Israel's come to represent and this idea of what's now being called freedom cities, basically corporate states, as the end point of the neoliberal project, right? After you've privatized everything, you may as well just say, like, well, why do I live in a country at all? Why can't I live just in a corporate state? So it's a return to something, but it's also a bunkered state. It's a corporate state that takes climate collapse, massive rage among the public who are locked out for granted. So it's pointing its weapons outwards. It understands that it's going to be facing hordes of angry people who need resources. And this is to come back to what I said at the beginning, that Israel, what it represents is a posture towards the suffering of the world. And this is what we're up against. And this is, in fact, what everyone is up against. In the world, this is why Gustavo Petro said so early after October 7th that what he sees in the genocide in Gaza, and he called it Global 1933, is the future of the world's poor if we stay on this course, right? So I think the work is a work of holding on to the specificities, because there are specificities, everything is not the same, but being able to find what are the linking logics that create the opportunities for very, very broad solidarity in this moment where absolutely everything is on the line, which can be very galvanizing indeed if we have the courage to look it in the eye.
I'm just going to switch the order a little bit, and I'm going to go to Dr. Ahmad and then come back to Eran Efrati. Because as you talk about the horror on the ground, you were there, Dr. Ahmad, you were there once, over a year ago. Talk about what you saw then. We most recently talked to Dr. Feroz Sidwa in Nasser, and you were at Nasser Hospital also. Nasser had just been struck again by the Israeli military. In between when Dr. Feroz Sidwa visited his young patient, who was getting better to his surprise, the young patient's father said 2 words in English over and over, thank you, thank you, thank you, to Dr. Feroz Sidwa. He left his bedside, and this young patient was killed in a strike just in the last weeks on Nasser Hospital. You tried to get back in, you weren't able to, but talk about what is happening on the ground, and then also talk about who's allowed in and who isn't.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I think I want to touch on a little bit about what's happening right now. I mean, we are now at 60 days where there hasn't been a single aid truck that's been able to enter into Gaza. And in January, with many of my colleagues who volunteered, we went to Capitol Hill, and we met with over 155 offices. And we told them in every single meeting, I remember very clearly saying, the cruelest thing imaginable would be for us to not get out of phase 1 of this ceasefire deal and for the fighter jets to scramble in the air again and to start bombing people. This was after 700, 800,000 Palestinians walked on foot back to the north of Gaza where their homes once were. And we were begging for us to do a serious thing here, for the United States to have play a pivotal role in maintaining a ceasefire agreement. And even then, every day we were hearing about drone strikes. Every day we were hearing about people being killed. And on March 13th, I made an attempt to go back into Gaza, and Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who I know well as Dr. Tammy, who I believe are both here, they had been able to enter the week before with an organization. And took time off, and we did all of this coordinating, and we had a whole plan set. And I showed up to Jordan, and the night before we're ready to leave at 6 a.m., convoy under the banner of the World Health Organization as a part of an emergency medical team, I was sent a WhatsApp message by the coordinator for the WHO with a screenshot, and then under it says, sorry. And my name was in red. And so I was basically being told that I would be rejected. What's the reason? No reason is given. And this was not a surprise. I mean, many people that I know had been rejected up until that point, but not a single Palestinian male, at least. I know there's 2 Palestinian women have been able to enter, but not a single Palestinian male since January has been able to enter into Gaza, with over 13 of us applying and trying to enter. Many of us who had worked there several times. I'd been to Gaza multiple times since 2009, working in humanitarian relief. And it was this just rejection that just came And it was as quickly as it came, the convoy departed the next day, and it was as if that was it. That was the end of that story. I brought this up with the American Embassy in Jerusalem. I brought this up with the State Department. I talked to many member states of the United Nations. And I found it really telling about the response from the embassy. They said, you were denied by Kogat, which is the Israeli military arm that coordinates humanitarian affairs in the occupied territories. You were denied for security reasons. And then they asked me a question. They said, by the way, are you Palestinian? Do you have a Palestinian ID? Or are your parents Palestinian, or were they born in Palestine? And first I said, yeah, like I'm gonna tell you guys now, I'm gonna share with you who's what. But I said, what's the point of asking that question? I was born and raised in Chicago at Cook County Hospital. Yeah. So why are you asking me that question? You're the U.S. Embassy. You're not the Israeli Embassy to the U.S. You're the U.S. Embassy to Israel. And it brought back so many memories of trying to advocate during the Biden administration. And, Professor Robin, you mentioned it's kind of a bipartisan effort, the support for Israel. And I felt that firsthand sitting in front of National Security Council, State Department, whether it was a Trump admin or a Biden administration. Did not matter. There was a bipartisan support for what was happening in Gaza. And I began to start saying, I'm not going to appeal to anybody's principles or their moral fiber or try to bring it in terms of this is the right thing to do, because they just don't care. And I just look at the last 60 days, and one thing that the State Department has told me repeatedly, as well as other members of Congress, is they said, the Israelis want us to point to specific incidents, like Al-Nasser, when Nasser was struck, or Al-Ahli a week later, where there were two American physicians, Dr. Razan and Dr. Sam Attar. They said they want specific incidents. That's the best way to elevate these cases. And I said, that's the wrong way to go about this, because there is a pattern of behavior that has persisted long before October 7th that the Israelis keep doing over and over again. And I just want to highlight that over the last 60 days. This is from the last 60 days. The UN safe house in Deir al-Balah was struck 3 days in a row in March, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday by Israeli tanks. Monday, it hit near the compound. Tuesday, it hit the compound. And Wednesday, it hit the compound roof and killed a Belgian international UN worker. And I want to highlight something here, because the Israeli military, when the UN said that they had been hit by the Israelis, said that this is baseless slander. And they maintained that line for several weeks until last week, long after the headlines had disappeared, the Washington Post said the Israelis say, yes, it was their tank that hit. And their tank was in the vicinity. And that they're looking into how that happened. And so for me, each of these incidents, as somebody who's worked on the ground, each of these incidents cannot be treated in an isolated fashion. Because once the headline disappears, it's on to the next headline. And it takes me back to Al-Ahli Hospital in October 2023 when it was struck. And I remember President Biden saying, oh, the information that we see is it was the other guys. And that incident escaped everyone's memory in terms of I would say the public's consciousness. Until what? Until Shifa became surrounded in November. Shifa, I had worked at Shifa several times. The way to understand Shifa is that it is the medical hub in Gaza. Everybody goes through Shifa. Medical students, doctors, but anybody that needs any sort of specialty care, you're going to Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. And I remember as the Israeli tanks surrounded that hospital, there was a colleague of mine who I'd worked with before. Her name is Rajat Muslih. And she was trapped inside of the hospital for 33 days. Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh, who you may be familiar with his name, the famous orthopedic surgeon, was trapped in that hospital, among other healthcare professionals. And I remember there was a story that emerged, and it was about 38 babies in the newborn nursery, and what would happen to these babies. And 8 of them ended up dying while the siege took place. But I remember that ultimately, the International Committee of the Red Cross was able to transport many of them to the south. Now, somebody who's been on the ground, you realize, okay, if Shifa's out of commission and they're sending them to the south, there's not a lot of healthcare facilities that can accommodate this influx of newborn babies, some of whom are critically ill and need specialized care. But we weren't making that connection. And then, so some of these babies, 22 of them, had been evacuated to Egypt and then gone from the headlines. What happened to those children? What happened to those babies? There was an article in February 2024, again by the Washington Post, that said many of them are still in Egypt. And there's a term we use, is like you graduated the NICU, or you've graduated from the newborn nursery. Like you've basically been discharged from that unit. And that many of them were still under the care of the Egyptian nurses there because they could not locate any family members. And that the presumption was that the parents had been killed in the assault on Gaza City. And then there was nothing about these kids again. And for me, we're not getting to a nuanced level of conversation. With exception, actually, when I've spoken to Democracy Now!, when I go on CNN and I talk to somebody like Dana Bash, and in 4 minutes, and one of the questions is, well, you know, the Israelis claim that Hamas is using the hospitals or they're using these human shields. And you're like, haven't we moved past this claim already? There have been hundreds of international workers since October 7th in these hospitals, and not a single person has said, yeah, I saw somebody in military fatigues, or I saw somebody carrying a rocket. When I was at Nasser Hospital, the Israeli military surrounded it. And they said that there was a rocket fired from the compound. And that was it. It was just this claim that was said, and suddenly it was the pretext to get rid of the second largest hospital in Gaza. The second largest hospital, and the first I just told you about, was out of commission. And so, for me, I think it's important to recognize that it's not just the moment that an airstrike hits the surgical ward at Nasser Hospital. It's about the reverberating effect and the message that you're sending the healthcare workers. It's not just that Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya was arrested from Kamal Adwan Pediatric Hospital in North Gaza. It's that everybody in Gaza and everybody in the world watched him walk up to a tank. It's that they know that he wrote 2 New York Times op-eds and that he's now still in Israeli prison without charge. And that somebody like Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, famous orthopedic surgeon, people would see him in the hallway and say hi to him at Shifa, that he was tortured to death at Ofar prison in Ramallah. Tortured to death, his naked body in the courtyard. It's not just that Oxfam had 4 water engineers in November of 2024 try to repair water infrastructure, which right now is so devastating that we're seeing an incredible rise of infectious disease. It's that you coordinated with the Israeli military, you deconflicted the route for the 4 water Palestinian engineers to go and fix it in Khan Yunis, and that an Israeli airstrike killed all 4 of them. What happens to other water engineers or humanitarian workers who want to go out? And I think the last thing I'll mention is I do feel that as we move forward trying to, we talk about the political moment, this political moment, is I think we have to hold ourselves accountable and think about the failures that we're responsible for. And I say this as somebody who feels that the international humanitarian community, that we failed pretty miserably. When somebody like me gets rejected, it's not about me. It doesn't matter that I get rejected from access. It's the fact that the World Health Organization feels like they cannot raise this or push back on that rejection. It's the fact that we have these organizations insisting on access over advocacy. Oh, don't say anything, don't take any pictures, don't bear witness. We have to get access, we have to get in. Well, 60 days, what has your access done? We've gotten no food inside of there. And so, in response, the reason I bring up the UN Safe House is because the Secretary General, Antonio Gutierrez, in response to a UN member being killed and one having an amputation out of the 5 who were injured, his decision was to decrease the international footprint in Gaza by 1/3, to decrease the international staff. My humble opinion, maybe I'm biased because I'm Palestinian, this is the moment you increase your staff. I feel that we've gotten to a point where there's been so many doctors and they've shared their testimony and they've told everybody how terrible the situation is. And at this point, I've thought about this really intensely and deeply because I feel a certain degree of frustration and, to be honest, depression. And for me, I have to bring it back to one thing, and I hope that this is something that people can take away. I don't want people to forget who these people were who have lost their lives in the 18 months. The Palestinians, people like Rifat al-Arir, Adnan al-Bursh, Hussam the journalist, Hind Rajab, soul of my soul, Tariq, and his granddaughter. Each time that we talk about one of these horrific events, I want us just to remember who these people were, because I felt, and this is something that I can say I've experienced personally, the dehumanization of Palestinians is gotten to a level where our president uses it as an insult. Chuck Schumer, he's a Palestinian. First of all, Chuck Schumer wishes he was a Palestinian. But even that, using these, some of the rhetoric that's used, that dehumanization, I think one of the things that we can do is just to tell the stories, to honor their memories, and to really be serious about what it is that we can do to make sure that they're not repeated again. And so I say this, and I hope that all of us can remember Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, can advocate for Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, can think about Hind Rajab, can think about the 15 first responders who were slaughtered when they were responding to a call in Rafah. And so I hope that we can continue to remember them and center their voices and center their stories, because there's a deliberate effort to censor them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad. You mentioned at the end there, and those 15 first responders. For people who don't know what happened to those responders, found buried in a mass grave, along with their ambulances and their fire truck. Eran Efrati, you understand well the Israeli military, having been a soldier yourself. I'm wondering if you can talk about your transformation, but take it right until today for how people can understand the Israeli security state. And then now, as a key member of Jewish Voice for Peace, what do you see as JVP's mandate, as those who care? I won't even say the left in the United States, because I think this goes way beyond those political divisions, but the role for the movement for justice in Palestine.
I'll do anything you want me to do, Amy. You're Amy Goodman. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
You all look beautiful from up here, except for the infiltrators. You look terrible. Hey, they're trying to silence us, but not today. Not in these numbers, not with this panel. It is a true honor to share the stage with these giants, truly, of and for our movements. I've been researching the Israeli military for 17 years, and I think a lot of researchers, academics, activists, are researching Palestine as a laboratory, right, where weapons and technologies are being tested before going abroad. And that is certainly very important. I think what is equally important and not nearly as examined is the laboratory-like conditions in Israel that are producing obedience, that are producing fascism, that are producing genocide right now, and that also produced me and my family and our beliefs. The same researchers and academics and activists often ask, what is the Israeli security model? And even us in JVP, while researching the now winning Deadly Exchange campaign, we're asking the same questions about what is our US law enforcement being trained of when getting to Israel with their Israeli counterparts. And I think the truth is that there isn't actually one weapon, or one methods of control, or one technology, or one AI use that Israel is using that is not already used in different variations by other repressive armies or regimes around the world. If there is a so-called Israeli model, it is in the structure of the society and their relationship to state apparatuses. Because in Israel, we, and I'm including my family, I'm including my community in it, not only did they accepted and normalized genocide long before October 7, but that they are sustaining genocide. They are working for genocide. Without those people, without the society laboring for it, this genocide could not have been sustained for so long. And you know, the same systems of control that are in place that are producing the genocide are also producing fascism in Israel. It actually is a dialectical thing. It has to happen at the same time. You know, in so many ways, Israel is a frontier for escalated genocide. And what I mean by that is that it's a problem to eliminate the indigenous people, but then also eliminate every other group that is resisting the settler state after them. And that comes with a price for Israelis as well. Israelis working for it, sustaining it, also accepting living in a forever war, or living under fascism, under authoritarian rule themselves. Now, if any of this sounds familiar to you, it might be because Israel, in many ways, is the past and the future of the United States. It is a brutal settler colonialism with a future of an all-encompassing surveillance state or police state, you know? And of course, many communities in the US have known this forever. It was part of this. Some of them are sitting in the front row, like Dr. Angela Davis, and they know that this is a part of the DNA of the United States. But as we are now in this moment of new escalated fascism, I think it's worth looking at Israeli society, and maybe I can offer just very quickly 3 lessons that we can take from the Israeli society in order to resist fascism here in the US. So humbly, the first lesson is the police state itself. You know, in Israel, there are many arms of state violence that are working together. There are state censorship, military censorship, and there's a secret service that is very active, and there's military spokesperson that is informing and giving talking points to every media channel in Israel, every journalist in Israel. We unfortunately do not have our Amy Goodman in Israel. But that is not what makes Israel a police state. That makes it a military state or a fascist state. What makes Israel a police state is the fact that the entirety of the civil society in Israel is also bought in and collaborating with those state violence or with those arms of state violence. Now, when we're now in the US in a moment when we hear about our universities that are doxing their own students and give their names to ICE, for example, or the IRS was doing the same, or TSA agents that are giving, checking your social media accounts before you determine your politics, before you enter the state, all of those are long-time practices in Israel that are normalized and accepted, and bodies are participating and working for them. And for us, there's a lesson here. What do we do to flex the ability of our civil society for refusal? We can't demand anything of ICE, right? We can't demand anything of TSA. Those agencies are working as designs. But what are we demanding out of our universities? What are we demanding out of our media? What accountability can we demand out of our media outlets? How do we rebuild our civil society? Quickly, the second lesson, relatedly, is about the military industries. In Israel, the military industries are in the heart of the state. They are a part of the DNA of the state as from its inception. You know, in Hebrew, we have a sentence that goes, it's not a country with a military, it's a military with a country. It's probably more right to say that it's a military industries with a country attached to it. It is really the engine in Israel of a forever. It's there behind every political decision. In the neighborhood that I grew up in Jerusalem, there's 2 elementary schools. One is called the Lockheed Martin for Advanced Science, and one is called Elbit School for Science. completely accepted, completely normalized, and defended, and protected, and working for it. The entire economy is surrounding the military industries. For us, there's an important lesson about a project that not in this room, but in many other rooms we have neglected, and that is the project of demilitarization in this country. You know, Naomi so eloquently alluded to the fact that the people that we are talking about are not just people that we disagree with, but they are our enemies. They are people that are preparing to kill us and then leave this earth. You know, and often we designed campaigns against the people that disagree with us. But the difference between people that disagree with us and our enemies is that our enemies are trying to kill us. And we need to identify that. Even in our movement, when we often talk about the US military aid to Israel, we often talk about it as a present that the US has given Israel. That is a mistake. We know today that 100% of the military aid package to Israel, of the $38 billion that goes to Israel, is actually being redirected to military corporations here in the United States in the form of contracts. We need to identify our enemies, we need to sharpen our campaigns, we need to demilitarize the US, not only Israel. And finally, very quickly, I think the last lesson for us is about us. It's about the people. You know, in Israel, there is a full society that is operating out of what we were taught as kids, which is a settler colonial zero-sum game that says that others can be put to death and to destruction while you thrive. In fact, in Israel, they're saying others have to be put to death and destruction for you to thrive. We have to resist this. We have to get much bigger than what we are. We have to work across movements. We have to rebuild a left, an unapologetic left. And we have to offer off-ramps and roadmaps and a vision for a Judaism beyond Zionism for people that want to join us. We have to grow. We have to play a real counterweight, not only to Jewish Zionist organizations that are declaring this genocide in our name, but for Christian Zionist institutions, for white supremacists, for the current US administration that under false pretenses of defending us are using us as a linchpin for fascism here in the United States. You know, we want everybody to do anything they can to stop this Holocaust that is happening in Gaza and all over Palestine. But the truth is that almost every community in the US is right now under attack. So the real question is, what are we doing for them? How are we showing up now for them? How are we building across our movements? And how are we now showing up out of the principle of what our rabbi, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, taught us? Life is precious only where life is precious. Thank you so much.
You should always use a mic if you have one. Professor Noura Erakat, you are also at the intersection of a number of different worlds that are really on the front lines right now of the attack by the administration. You're a university professor, you're at Rutgers, you're a human rights lawyer, and we see on the one hand, and you're a Palestinian American, and what that means. We see on the one hand this rounding up of thousands of people in this country. Over 1,000 students have lost their visas, but a judge has ruled, no, that cannot continue. Those visas must be restored. And at this moment, the Trump administration is accepting that as they move on in different ways. But you have the people that have been taken, that have been detained, not just lost their visas, And we see the effect of organizing. I mean, Mahmoud Khalil is in Louisiana. You have Rumeysa Ozturk, a judge has ruled, as in the case of Mahmoud, that their cases should be heard in the north where they were first taken, or at least in states nearby. For Rumeysa, that's Vermont. For Mahmoud, it's New Jersey. And speaking of Vermont, you have the Columbia University student, the Palestinian activist Mohsen Madawi, who was just released. Who thanked so many people for being there for him. He has to stay in Vermont, but can go graduate from Columbia. Question is, what role did Columbia play in his abduction, in the detention of Mahmoud? So you're a professor and also in the world of law. And we see judges now on the front lines at every level of fighting the Trump administration, even judges appointed by Trump. The latest judge in Mohsen's case saying, and we quoted this with Angela Davis this morning, saying the court considers the extraordinary setting of this case and others like it. Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day. Our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare, the Palmer raids of 1919-20 that led to the deportation of hundreds of people. If you can talk about where you think the pressure points, especially in this group of people, Jews, Jewish Voice for Peace, what are the pressure points that are most effective in pushing?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. I've had a wonderful time up here. I think I got the best seat for this amazing talk. I'm going to start somewhere else, Amy, real quick, and just say it's really wonderful. It's really, really wonderful to be in this room and to be with you. And I think, you know, I've been in a lot of spaces. I've been in a lot of spaces with lawmakers and decision makers in Europe, in the United States, at the UN, in Congress, at the Senate. And it's been really, really sad that in those places, they're looking at me and asking me, what can we do? What can we do? And it's like, nah, you aren't serious right now. And what it indicates is a crisis in people feeling that they have no power. And we are reminding ourselves in this gathering and in every gathering where we overcome our isolation and we are defiant to affirm very loudly that we are power. We don't need to look around. You don't need to be looking to nobody or talking to anybody. It's this congregation and it's this building power. It's actually, you know, I think it was early in February 2024. I contacted Dr. Angela Davis to say, I don't know why I keep running my mouth. Or it's February 2024. And she said that this work needs to be done. And it sat with me now in every one of these rooms where I realized that the work was basically us coming together. And it's in this moment that we are, in real time, composing a song that is etched with our feelings, that you're reverberating through us that's coming back from this stage. So as we hear these words, I just want to say that this is a collective moment of a feeling that will forever remain in our bodies, that should remind us that we are power, that we are invincible, that we are victorious. So thank you for letting me be a part of this song right now. I am going to get to the question, but I realize that there's not going to be a time for a round two, so I'm going to take the privilege of starting somewhere else, which is, and just something very personal for me also that, and I was reminded of this. The March 18th resumption of the bombardment was probably the hardest and most difficult thing to go through, because I thought surely international powers that have had reprieve from this would not allow this to resume. And not only was I wrong, but in that moment, simultaneously, our students and our beloveds started to be kidnapped and needing of support. And so my vibrations dropped at the same time that I was traveling abroad. And in those travels, I was nicely reminded, where in communities where people agree there's a genocide and agree that genocide is bad, that the US is empire, but the US is not the world. We're a minority out here. We're a minority, thank God. We're a minority, because something's horribly wrong with us. There's a sickness our society has become afflicted with, right? And so, but in that moment, when my vibrations started to rise, I started to see the world a little differently, because it's been really hard for me, especially with, I have a lot of comrades, and a lot of comrades want to, lift me up as we're reminded. 2,300 Palestinians have been killed just since March 18th, right? And that's not even, I don't even know the name of the child who was flung from a rooftop to another rooftop, and the girl behind him that was split in half. I don't know the names of the Palestinians who were struck so hard by a bomb, they flew above the clouds. I don't know. I don't know the name of those 30 Palestinians and 14 children that were targeted by an Elbit sky striker, also known as a suicide drone, that hovers around them until it shoots them. F those people who tell you Hamas is the target. F those people. And especially to the infiltrators in this room, you are so lucky to be here and be educated in this moment. I'll give you a shit ton of talking points if you need to go tell your colleagues. But it's really hard for me, in the depth of that loss, to kind of say what some of my comrades tell me, which is, look, Algeria lost 2 million Algerians, and that's the cost of decolonization and what we gotta do. I can't. My heart can't do it. I can't tell a mama who lost all 3 of her children that this is worth it. I can't, because nobody asked her if her kids could be sacrificed. But at the same time, as I can't claim necessarily that we are victorious, 2 things are true. 2 things are true. One is that we have experienced a number of small victories. And those victories include seeing some of our longest held prisoners released, including Nail Barghouti, Mohammed Al-Tous, Khaled Jarrar, who keeps getting kidnapped, bless her soul, may she be protected, and other unruly, defiant women. Out of control, out of control. But also, and very importantly, Leonard Peltier. I'm gonna take all the victories that we have. And then I think the other thing that's true, that's not equivalent to being victorious as Palestinians in this moment and winning, is the fact that without a doubt, Israel is losing. Without a doubt, Israel is losing. And I'm making a distinction here between equating their loss with our victory, because I think we are so much more than what Israel is or isn't, right? Our liberation is not defined in relationship to Israel, but defined in relationship to ourselves. And there are many, many things that I would want to see, including, as reminded by my other I love historians, Professor Ahmad Shukr. One of the main things for me, I want to build and see is the reconstitution of a Palestinian national leadership. That's when I'm going to start to say we're winning, right? But that said, Israel is losing. Israel is losing. They have exposed themselves as the most inept, shitty army I have ever seen, okay? I don't mean to make it a joke, because they're evil, right? and should all be held to account. But the fact that all they've had is training of how to harass little children, to kick them and terrorize them, that now they have been funded with an unyielding flow of weapons for 573 days and have only extracted 8 captives and hostages through military force. The other 139, returned through diplomacy, is a really terrible sign for them. They're horrible. They can't do this. They're losing on the ground. They're also losing very clearly within their own society as they're lockstep towards authoritarianism, sacking their AG, going after the Supreme Court. As Professor Ilan Pape, another historian, has pointed out, this Israel on the brink. This is Zionism at its end. And there's its own internal conflict of the state of Israel between the state of Judea and Samaria. I know, wonderful, but not our victory necessarily yet. And then, even if you take it beyond, think about their isolation in the international community. I know the international community isn't doing anything, but trust that nobody looks to Israel as a model, right? They're isolated, they don't like them, they aren't sure how to move around them, and those are the people that are honest, not the ones that are, in deals and expanding their power and whatnot. But they're isolated. The ICC, in its 23 years of existence, has basically only gone after African and Arab heads of state, all right? It has investigated 36 cases, only 6 of those have been beyond the African continent, and it has issued 60 arrest warrants, and only 3 have been for non-European or European adjacent leaders, Vladimir Putin, and now Netanyahu and Gallant. They're losing. They're losing. And we made that possible. And then finally, here in the United States, Zionism is so morally bankrupt. And this is saying a lot. I know for us it's like common sense, right? But it used to be heralded by some people we really care about, like W.E.B. Du Bois, who saw it as a model of national liberation. We're now in a moment where Zionism is basically the twin sister of authoritarianism, where those who once sought refuge are now aligning with a white supremacist authoritarian government to hunt down and deport those who are in need of refuge. Israel's losing. Zionism is losing. And so I want to just, we keep on keeping. We have not succeeded in ending the genocide, but we have succeeded in so much else. And I just want to give us, some credit for that. And now I've got a minute to tell you about the boomerang, which I won't go over. I'm going to stick to time. And just say this.
Talk about the boomerang.
What?
Talk about the boomerang.
Talk about the boomerang? No, I won't do that. No, I won't do that. No. I'm going to go to some workshops. Maybe I'll talk to some folks in there. But I'll just say this part about what I was trying to say there. And it's not my idea. Amy Césaire, Martinican poet, essayist, activist, says this. I think it was 51? 1950, in Discourse on Colonialism. And really, this was a scathing rebuke of how the international community comes together to condemn Hitler and to condemn genocide and to give it a name and to say, this is bad to annihilate a people. And he basically says, all y'all Europeans are little Hitlers inside of you, trying to make yourselves feel better by making him, the evil guy. But you all practiced this and perfected it against brown, black, and indigenous peoples all over the world. And now you basically brought, nothing you do in your colonial geography, you're not gonna bring home, right? I recently saw a video of Iqbal Ahmad, a Pakistani-American intellectual revolutionary accused of kidnapping Henry Kissinger. Not sure what happened, but anyway. But he has a speech in 75, talking to an audience in Ann Arbor, Michigan about, do you know what the relationship between the US war in Indochina, specifically Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, is to US oppression at home? And he gets into it. And we're here 50 years later, saying the same thing. that there is no US colonial war, there is no US genocide, there is no US imperial violence that does not affect us all. None of it. Be it the boomerang of when we become an imperial power beyond these shores in 1898 in the defeat of the Spanish, right? In the Spanish-American War, and then we become the colonial power in the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. And that's when our armies reconstitute themselves to maintain colonial holdings, and our police forces reconstitute themselves to act like those imperial armies, with surveillance, with racial profiling, with mounted police, right? Be it the Vietnam War, right? Also genocide, let's call it by its name. Be it the Vietnam genocide, where we bring SWAT tactics back to the US, and the first one is used against the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles in 1969. Or the US war on terror, which completely gutted international and constitutional law. We've been here before. And now where my argument is, we're seeing it in real time. This is a real-time boomerang where we're seeing the expansion of presidential power, we're seeing the destruction of our protection, we're seeing the surveillance of people, we are seeing violence at home with our complicity. So the last thing I'll say, I don't know when that ran out, but the last thing I'll say, and I just want to center this, I don't think, this is a Mahmoud Darwish. Somebody just recently said it to me in Arabic, I'll say it to you in English. Mahmoud Darwish writes that Palestinians are no more chosen than any other people, but no people are more chosen than us. And I emphasize that before I say that this is the moment to center Palestinians. This is the moment to protect Palestinians. This is the moment to recognize that we have long been the guinea pig for state repression. What happens to us will happen to you. Rasmiya Odeh had her citizenship revoked. Okay, in 2017. Stephen Salaita had his tenure revoked in 2015. We've seen the LA8 on trial. We've seen the Holy Land Foundation, right? We are the guinea pig. And so I'm not saying to necessarily center us because we are more victimized than anybody else. But I am saying center us because it's absolutely necessary for your safety too, and not least because in this moment, we are being attacked. There could be mobs coming after us. And if you try to protect us, you can get in trouble, right? So what does that mean? What does that mean where the punishment is reserved for those who don't harm us enough? And so I'm gonna leave you with that, of how it is that we move forward in doing the work just as a principle and an element as part of guiding us in our organizing. Thank you.
And this is only the first plenary of the weekend. Noura, Erakat, thank you so much. Dr. Ahmad, thank you. Eran Efrati, thank you. Naomi Klein, thank you. And Robin D.G. Kelley.
And Amy.